I died on a Tuesday. The marble was cold beneath my back. 31 floors down, and the city never even paused. Blood pooled around my skull, warm, then cooling fast, copper thick in my throat. Someone screamed. It wasn't me. I was already gone. I woke up gasping in my childhood bed. Sunlight cut through gauze curtains. My hands were smooth again, no scars, no wedding ring. 24 years old. 5 years before the fall. There was one thing I didn't understand yet. Why my father's funeral was happening again, exactly the way I remembered it. But I would understand soon enough. The smell hit me first. Lilies, thick and funeral sweet, choking the hallway outside my door. Under it, faint furniture polish, the specific lemon oil scent of Calloway House, my family's auction business. I hadn't smelled that combination in 10 years. My chest ached before my mind caught up. I sat up. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. In my last life, this morning had broken me. This time I just felt cold and very awake. Downstairs, black-clad mourners drank coffee out of my mother's china. My stepmother Diane stood by the window, a widow's veil pushed back, dabbing dry eyes with a handkerchief that had never touched water. Her perfume reached me before she did. Heavy gardenia, sickly sweet, the same perfume that would fill a penthouse hallway 5 years from now, right before I went over a railing. My stomach turned. I kept my face still. Iris. Diane crossed the room, arms open, gardenia rolling off her like a wave. Your father would be so proud of how strong you're being. I let her hug me. I counted her heartbeat against my shoulder, quick, too quick for grief. I'm sure he would, I said. Behind her, Vanessa lingered near the fireplace, 22 years old, already rehearsing sympathy in the mirror over the mantel. My stepsister had never once, in either lifetime, cried for my father. She was checking her lipstick. I filed that away. Small detail. It would matter later. The will reading was scheduled for Friday. I already knew every line of it. I'd heard it read once before, in another version of this week, in another version of my life. 51% of Calloway House to me. 49% to Diane and Vanessa combined. A house worth $8 million on paper, built on 300 years of provenance and forged signatures nobody had caught yet. Last time, I'd taken that 51% like a prize. I hadn't known what it actually was. This time, I already knew where the bodies were. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. That was the official story. And it was almost true. His heart had stopped, technically, under the specific pressure of $4 million he owed a man named Dorian Kess. I hadn't learned that until 18 months into my old life, going through a filing cabinet Diane thought she'd emptied. By then it was already too late to matter to anyone but me. This time, I had 5 years head start. I intended to use every day of it. At the reception, Julian Voss found me by the coat closet, smelling of sandalwood and expensive scotch. That smell hit me like a fist to the chest, the way it always would, for the rest of whatever life I had left. In my old life, that cologne was the last thing I ever smelled. It followed me over the railing. You look like you've seen a ghost, Julian said, smiling the smile that had once made me stupid with love. I looked at his hands instead of his face. Steady. Manicured. Hands that had, in another timeline, gripped my wrist hard enough to bruise, more than once, behind closed doors, always with an apology ready afterward. Just tired, I said. It's been a long week. I'm here. He touched my elbow. Whatever you need. What I needed. He could never give me. What I needed was 5 years I already knew how to spend. There was one thing neither of them understood about that Friday's will reading. I wasn't planning to keep what my father left me. I was planning to hand it away, wrapped in a bow, to the 2 people who'd earned it least. But I'll get to that. The days before the reading blurred with condolence calls and lily deliveries. I spent them differently than I remembered spending them the first time. I made one phone call late Wednesday night, to a number I'd memorized in my previous life and never expected to need again. Walter Chen, my father's longtime accountant, the only person at Calloway House who'd ever looked at me like I mattered more than my last name. Iris. His voice cracked with surprise. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I need to see the books, I said. Before Friday. A pause stretched over the line, long enough that I heard his kettle whistle in the background. Your father asked me not to show anyone those books, he said carefully. Not even you. He's dead, Walter. I think that changes things. Another pause. Then, quietly, come by tomorrow morning. Before the office opens. I hung up and sat in the dark of my bedroom, listening to the house settle around me, old wood ticking, radiators clanking 2 floors down. In my old life, I'd never made that call until it was too late for it to save anyone. This time, I wasn't waiting for permission. Walter's office smelled of instant coffee and old paper, dust motes swimming gold in the desk lamp's light. He slid a folder across to me with hands that trembled slightly. 4 million, he said. To a man named Dorian Kess. Your father used the warehouse land as collateral. The one on Route 9. I already knew this. I let my face show shock anyway. There's something else. Walter's voice dropped lower, like the walls might be listening. The warehouse land. It's contaminated. PCBs, from a tannery that used to be there in the 70s. Your father knew. He buried the report instead of paying for remediation. That part I hadn't known the first time, not until it was far too late to use it. This time, I wrote the number of the file box down on the inside of my wrist, in pen, like a woman memorizing an exit route. Does Diane know? I asked. Diane doesn't read anything longer than a shopping receipt, Walter said, and for the first time all morning, something like a smile touched his mouth. No. She doesn't know. I thanked him and walked out into a cold March morning, breath fogging in front of me, gravel crunching under my boots. Somewhere behind me, church bells started ringing for a funeral, 3 blocks over, someone else's grief drifting through the frozen air. I had 4 days until the will reading. I intended to use every hour. Friday came wrapped in gray sky and the smell of impending snow. Callaway House's boardroom looked exactly the way I remembered it: mahogany table, brass lamps, my father's lawyer clearing his throat like a man about to read a verdict instead of a will. Diane sat rigid in black silk. Gardenia perfume thick enough to taste. Vanessa sat beside her, scrolling her phone under the table, bored already. 51% of Callaway House, and all accompanying assets, the lawyer read, to Iris Callaway. Vanessa's head snapped up. Diane's hand found her daughter's knee under the table. A warning. A leash. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds before I spoke. I don't want it, I said. The lawyer blinked at me over his glasses. I'm sorry. I'm giving my shares to Vanessa, I said. All of them. Effective immediately, if the paperwork allows it. Diane's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Vanessa's expression did something complicated: suspicion, then greed. Then something close to triumph. All in the space of 2 seconds. Why would you do that? Vanessa asked. And for once there was no performance in her voice. Just genuine confusion. I thought about telling her the truth, that I already knew exactly what she was about to inherit. That underneath the mahogany and the provenance and the $8 million valuation sat $4 million of debt to a man who broke kneecaps for a living, and a stretch of poisoned land with the EPA circling closer every year. Instead, I gave her a version of the truth she could actually swallow. I don't want the responsibility, I said. I want to build something that's mine. Something that isn't Dad's name on the door. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole shape of it. Diane recovered first. Gardenia perfume rolling off her as she leaned forward. Iris. Sweetheart. Are you sure? This is a very generous I'm sure, I said. I watched Vanessa's fingers curl slightly against the table, the way a person's hands move when they're already spending money they don't have yet. She didn't say thank you. She never would, in either lifetime. But she signed the transfer papers before the lawyer had even finished explaining the tax implications. That was the first thing I gave away on purpose. It would not be the last. Julian found me in the parking lot afterward, his sandalwood cologne cutting through the cold air like a blade. He didn't know it yet, but I was about to give him away to hand him over like a party favor to a woman who thought she'd just won everything. That was a big move in there, he said. Wasn't it? I said. And smiled at him the way I used to. Before I knew better. The contract on the warehouse land, the one tied to Dorian Kess's loan, expired in 90 days. Diane didn't know that yet. Vanessa didn't know it either. I did. I'd read the renewal clause in Walter's folder twice, memorizing every date like scripture. 90 days. I had 90 days to watch a trap I hadn't built finish closing on its own, and I had 90 days to build one more, right alongside it. I made one more phone call that night, from the cold quiet of my bedroom, to a law firm downtown I'd never used in my old life. A woman named Eleanor Pratt picked up on the second ring, her voice calm and unhurried, like she'd been waiting for my call. "Miss Calloway," she said. "I was wondering when you'd reach out." I didn't ask how she knew my name before I gave it. Not yet. That question would matter later. For now, I just said the only thing that mattered. "I need a lawyer," I said, "who isn't afraid of Dorian Kess." There was a pause on the line, brief and strange, almost like a smile I couldn't see. "You've called the right office," Eleanor Pratt said. I didn't know it yet, but that one phone call would end up being the most important thing I did all year. Vanessa called me 2 days later, her voice bright with borrowed confidence. "I signed the lease for Dad's old office," she said. "The corner one. With the view." "Congratulations," I said. "You should come by sometime. See what I'm doing with the place." A pause, sharp enough to hear. "Unless that's too hard for you." It wasn't hard. It was almost funny. She was decorating a room built on quicksand, hanging new curtains over a window that would soon be boarded shut by federal agents. I said none of that. "I'll try to stop by," I said instead, and meant every word of it, just not the way she thought I did. That same week, I opened an account at a credit union across town, one with no ties to my father's estate, no ties to Diane's name on any paperwork. I moved what little savings I had into it, quietly. One transfer at a time, small enough that nobody watching the family accounts would notice the pattern. $200 here. $300 there. A woman's whole future. Assembled in whispers. Eleanor Pratt met me at her office the following Monday, all glass and cold steel, nothing like the mahogany warmth of Calloway House. She read through Walter's folder without a single change in her expression, pen tapping once against the desk when she reached the contamination report. "This is enough to bury someone," she said finally. "If used correctly." "How long before it's ready?" I asked. 90 days, maybe less. She looked up at me, something unreadable behind her eyes. Same as the loan renewal, I'd imagine. I hadn't told her about the loan renewal date. I hadn't told anyone. "How did you know that?" I said. It wasn't really a question. Eleanor Pratt just closed the folder, smiled the smallest amount possible, and told me she'd see me next week. I walked out into the cold, not knowing whether I'd just hired the smartest lawyer in the city, or something else entirely. I didn't have an answer yet. But I was already sure of one thing. Whatever she was on my side. And in 90 days, that was going to matter more than anything else I owned. Spring came late that year, cold rain instead of sun, but Vanessa's office renovation finished on schedule. She threw a party to celebrate champagne on ice, a string quartet nobody requested. The whole third floor of Calloway House lit up like a stage set. I came, because staying away would have looked suspicious. Diane greeted me at the door in a new dress. Gardenia perfume thicker than ever. Diamonds catching the chandelier light. "Doesn't it look beautiful?" she said, gesturing at the room like she'd built it herself. Beautiful, I agreed, and meant the irony of it more than the room. Vanessa found me by the bar, a glass of champagne already loosening her tongue. "You really gave this up easy," she said, not quite a question. "Some people would have fought harder." "Some people don't know what they want," I said. "I know exactly what I want." She smiled, sharp and satisfied. "And now I have it." Behind her, Julian appeared with 2 fresh glasses, sandalwood cologne rolling ahead of him like smoke. He handed one to Vanessa, not to me. His hand lingered on her waist a beat too long. That was new. That hadn't happened this early, the first time. "You two look cozy," I said, keeping my voice light. Keeping my face still. Vanessa's smile widened. "Julian's been so helpful. Advising me on the business." She leaned into him. "Proprietary." Victorious. I think Dad would have wanted us to work together. My father would have wanted no such thing. But I let her have the moment. I let her have all of it: the champagne, the string quartet, the man who used to put bruises where sleeves would hide them. Every second she spent enjoying this was a second closer to the 90-day clock running out. I should have felt something sharper than I did. Instead, I just felt cold and patient, the way you feel standing at the edge of a very long drop, waiting for someone else to fall first. I left before the party ended. Nobody noticed. That was fine. I'd stopped needing anyone at that party to notice me a long time ago, in a life none of them remembered living. My new apartment sat above a bakery 2 miles from Calloway House, small enough that I could touch both walls of the kitchen at once. The smell of baking bread drifted up through the floorboards every morning at 5. I'd never smelled anything so honest in my life. Warm, plain, nothing to hide underneath it. I got a job at a furniture restoration shop 3 blocks over, sanding down old chairs for a woman named Rosa who didn't care whose daughter I used to be. My hands blistered the first week. By the second, calluses had started forming. Hard ridges of skin where diamond rings used to sit on other women's fingers at parties I no longer attended. "You've got good hands for this," Rosa told me, turning a chair leg under the workshop light. Patient hands. I didn't tell her how much patience the rest of my life required. Some nights, after the shop closed, I sat on my apartment's narrow fire escape with a mug of cheap coffee, watching the street below. A woman named Priya from the bakery downstairs joined me most evenings, flowers still dusted on her forearms, laughing easily at nothing in particular. It was the first friendship I'd built in either lifetime that didn't come with an invoice attached. I didn't tell her about Calloway House. I didn't tell her about the fall. Some things I kept only for myself, and for the 90-day clock ticking quietly in the back of my mind. Eleanor Pratt's office became a second workshop, one where I sanded down evidence instead of wood. Every Tuesday evening, after my shift at Rosa's, I sat across from her with a growing folder of paper. "Bank records," she said one week, sliding a printout toward me. "Dorian Cass wired $4 million to your father's Shell account 18 months before he died. It's all here." The printer in the corner hummed and clicked, spitting out page after page, the smell of hot toner filling the small room. I ran my thumb along the edge of one document, paper thick and slightly warm from the machine. "What about the contamination report?" I asked. "Sealed with the State Environmental Office. But I have a friend there." Eleanor's pen tapped once against her desk, a habit I was starting to recognize. Give it time. Time was the one thing I had more of than anyone else at that table. I closed my old joint account with Diane the following week, the one my father had set up years ago for family expenses, the one Diane had been quietly draining for herself since before he died. I moved the remaining balance into my credit union account without a word to anyone, canceled the linked card, and watched the confirmation email land in my inbox with a small, private satisfaction. Nobody noticed yet. That was fine too. A trap only works if the person walking into it doesn't hear it click shut. 3 weeks after the party, Diane called me, her voice tight in a way I hadn't heard since my father's actual funeral. "Have you touched the family account?" she asked, no greeting, straight into the accusation. "It wasn't a family account," I said. "It was Dad's. And now it's mine." "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. And hung up before she could finish the sentence. My hands were steady when I set the phone down. In my old life, that phone call would have ended in an apology from me, some small surrender to keep the peace. This time, I just made myself a cup of tea and watched the steam curl toward the ceiling, calm as still water. 2 days later, something shifted that I hadn't planned for. A man I didn't recognize started parking a gray sedan across the street from my apartment, watching the bakery entrance with the patient stillness of someone paid to watch, not to act. I noticed him on a Thursday morning, buying coffee 2 doors down, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. I knew exactly who had sent him. I just wasn't ready to say so, not even to myself. That night I called Walter Chen instead of Eleanor. My voice lower than I meant it to be. "Dorian Cass," I said. "Does he know about the transfer? About Vanessa taking the shares?" "He knows everything eventually," Walter said. "That's how men like him stay rich." I looked out my window at the empty street, the gray sedan gone for the night, and felt the 90-day clock tighten one notch closer around all of us. Vanessa's first crack showed up in May, small and easy to miss if I hadn't already known exactly where to look. I ran into her outside a bank downtown, her makeup slightly less perfect than usual, a stack of paperwork clutched too tight against her chest. "Everything okay?" I asked, letting concern color my voice, cheap and easy to fake. "Fine," she said, too fast. "Business stuff. Boring." Behind her sharp politeness, something flickered fear, quick and unfamiliar on her face, gone before she could stop me from seeing it. Someone had started asking Vanessa questions she didn't have answers for. I already knew who. "Let me know if you need anything," I said, and watched her walk away faster than she needed to. That was the first crack. It would not be the last. 2 weeks after that, my phone rang at 11 at night. An unknown number lighting up the dark of my bedroom. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Miss Calloway." A man's voice. Calm. Faintly accented. Unhurried in a way that made my skin go tight. "You don't know me yet." "Who is this?" I said, though some part of me already knew. "A friend of your stepsister's business partner." A pause, long enough to feel deliberate. "Tell her the renewal deadline hasn't moved. 60 days left." The line went dead before I could answer. I sat very still in the dark, phone warm against my ear, my heart beating loud enough to hear over the radiator's hiss. Dorian Kess knew my name. That wasn't supposed to happen yet. Not this early. Not before I was ready for it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a list every piece of evidence I had, every date, every name, laid out in careful handwriting under the buzz of a bare bulb. 60 days had just become the only number that mattered. I saw Julian again the following week, at a restaurant I used to love in my old life, back when his hand on my back still felt like safety instead of a warning. He was with Vanessa, laughing at something, his sandalwood cologne drifting across the room the moment the door opened. The smell hit me like a fist to the chest. My vision blurred at the edges, just for a second a penthouse balcony, cold railing under my palms, his voice behind me saying something I couldn't quite hear anymore, and then nothing but falling. I gripped the edge of my table until the flashback passed. Nobody noticed. I'd gotten good at that. In 5 years I hadn't lived yet. Vanessa spotted me on her way out and detoured toward my table. Julian trailing a step behind her, his hand low on her back the way it used to sit on mine. "Still eating alone?" Vanessa said, not quite cruel, just careless in the particular way only she could manage. "Must be lonely, giving everything away." "I manage," I said. "I bet you do." She smiled, glancing at Julian like he was a trophy she'd won fair. "Some of us just know how to hold on to what matters." I watched them walk out into the evening, his cologne fading behind them, and felt something settle low and cold in my chest. She thought she'd won something. She had no idea what she was actually holding. That night, I opened my laptop and started drafting an email I wouldn't send for another month. I addressed it to a reporter named Nadia Cole, someone who'd covered white-collar fraud for a local paper in my old life. Someone who'd never once returned my calls back when I was a grieving widow with nothing left to offer her but grief. This time, I had something better than grief. I had proof. I saved the draft without sending it. 60 days. I could wait 60 days for the right moment. I'd waited 5 years for less. There was one thing I still hadn't told anyone, not Walter, not Eleanor, not even myself in the quiet hour before sleep. Somewhere in that stack of documents on my kitchen table sat the exact date my old life had ended. May the 14th. I hadn't noticed it until that week, staring at Dorian Kess's original loan contract, the date circled in my father's own careful handwriting. Whatever happened this time, it was going to happen before that date came around again. Rosa gave me extra shifts that June, and I took every one of them. Sanding wood was honest work. It didn't lie to me, and I didn't have to lie to it. Some afternoons, elbow deep in varnish and sawdust, I almost forgot I was building a case against my own family in the hours I wasn't there. Almost. Never quite. Eleanor called me into her office on a Tuesday with a manila envelope already waiting on her desk. The environmental office finished their preliminary review, she said. Route 9 warehouse. Confirmed PCB contamination, well above the legal threshold. How long has Vanessa known? I asked. She hasn't been told yet. Eleanor slid the envelope toward me. The state hasn't issued anything public. Not yet. I ran my fingers along the envelope's edge, paper crisp under my calluses. Not yet meant something specific in Eleanor's mouth. It meant timing, not chance. When it goes public, I said, I want it to land exactly when it'll hurt the most. Eleanor's mouth curved, the smallest amount possible. I had a feeling you'd say that. I left an envelope of my own on her desk that day, copies of the loan documents, the bank transfers, everything Walter had handed me months earlier. Evidence stacking on evidence, quiet and patient, like sediment settling at the bottom of a river. Nobody was watching yet. Diane found me outside the workshop 2 days later, waiting by my car with her arms crossed, gardenia perfume cutting through the smell of sawdust still clinging to my clothes. You closed the account, she said. It wasn't a question anymore. I told you I would. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her voice cracked, thin and furious. Vanessa needs that money. The business needs that money. The business isn't my problem, I said. I gave it away, remember? Something flashed behind Diane's eyes, not grief, not even anger exactly. Fear, raw and unpolished, the first time I'd ever seen it on her face in either lifetime. You knew, she said slowly. You knew something, when you signed those papers. I let the silence answer for me. Diane's hand went to her throat, gardenia perfume suddenly sharp enough to taste, and for one long moment, neither of us said anything at all. I don't know what you're talking about. I finally said, and walked past her to my car. Behind me, I heard her breath catch, quick and shallow. That was the second crack. The clock had just gotten a little louder in her ears too. Vanessa's cruelty found new shape that summer. She stopped by Rose's shop one Saturday, heels clicking sharp against the concrete floor, diamond rings catching the fluorescent light. I heard you're sanding chairs now, she said, not bothering to hide her amusement. How very working class of you. Rosa looked up from her bench, unimpressed, and said nothing. I kept sanding. You used to have real dreams, Vanessa continued. Now look at you. Sawdust in your hair, nowhere to be. She smiled, sharp as broken glass. I almost feel sorry for you. Don't, I said. I'm exactly where I want to be. She laughed, bright and cruel, and left without buying anything. The bell over the door jingled behind her, too cheerful for the moment it marked. That was villain escalation, the kind that used to cut deep in another life. This time it barely registered. I'd already buried worse from her, once, on a cold balcony floor. Sawdust in my hair was nothing compared to that. I called Nadia Cole for the first time 2 weeks later, my finger hovering over the send button on that draft email for a long moment before I finally sent it. She called back within the hour, her voice sharp with interest. You have documentation? She asked, straight to business, no small talk wasted. I have everything, I said. But I need you to wait for my signal before you run anything. A pause on her end, considering. Why should I trust your timeline over my own instincts? Because my instincts have already cost me everything once, I said. I'm not making that mistake twice. She agreed to wait. I hung up feeling the 90-day clock shift into something sharper, something closer to a weapon than a countdown. The flashbacks came more often that summer, triggered by things I couldn't always predict. A stranger's sandalwood cologne on the subway sent me straight back to that balcony railing, cold under my palms, Julian's voice behind me low and final. A woman's gardenia perfume in an elevator once dropped me to my knees in a public bathroom, gasping, 31 floors and 5 years away from where I actually stood. I never told anyone. Some wounds you carry alone, sanding them down slowly, the way you'd smooth a splintered chair leg patient, private, never quite finished. 45 days before the loan renewal deadline, Julian showed up at my apartment unannounced, sandalwood cologne announcing him before I even opened the door. We need to talk, he said, stepping past me into my kitchen without waiting for an invitation. About what? About whatever you're doing. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping under his skin. Vanessa's been asking questions. Diane's falling apart. And somehow, every time something goes wrong, your name comes up. I haven't done anything, I said, and it was almost true. I'd simply stopped protecting people who'd never once protected me. Julian stepped closer, close enough that his cologne filled the small kitchen entirely. Close enough that my whole body remembered a balcony I hadn't fallen from yet in this lifetime. His hand found my wrist, not gentle, not quite gripping either a warning, the way it always used to start. "Don't play games with me, Iris," he said quietly. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back up at his face, steady in a way that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "Let go of my wrist," I said, "or I'll make one phone call that ends your night very differently." He let go. Something in my voice must have carried the truth of it, because he stepped back, jaw tight, and left without another word. I stood alone in my kitchen afterward, hands shaking slightly now that he was gone, and understood something I hadn't fully let myself admit before that moment. I wasn't just trying to bury Vanessa and Diane anymore. I was making sure Julian never got the chance to put his hands on anyone else the way he'd once put them on me. That was the open loop I'd carried since the funeral, quiet under everything else. Now, finally, I let myself close it. I wasn't giving Julian to Vanessa as punishment for her. I was giving him to her as a warning I intended to make sure she never survived long enough to ignore. And underneath that closed loop, a new one opened, small and sharp. Because 2 nights later, going through the last of my father's old files, I found a name I didn't recognize scrawled in the margin of a bank statement, a name that would turn out to matter more than anything else I'd uncovered so far. I just didn't know it yet. The renewal deadline arrived on a Thursday, gray and ordinary, rain streaking the bakery's front window below my apartment. I woke up early, made coffee, and watched the clock on my stove tick toward 9 like it was any other morning. It wasn't. By 9:15, Eleanor Pratt had filed the environmental complaint with the state office, 4 months of preparation compressed into a single stack of paper. By 9:30, Nadia Cole had the full story loaded and ready, waiting only for my signal. By 10, Walter Chen had sworn testimony sitting in a lawyer's safe, describing exactly how my father's signature had been forged on 2 loan documents years earlier. I sent one text message. Just 3 words. Go. Everything happened fast after that. Nadia's article went live at 10:15. Contaminated land. Forged signatures. A $4 million debt to a man with a long history of violence. My phone buzzed once, twice, then didn't stop. By 11, Callaway House's business account had been frozen pending investigation. By noon, 2 of Vanessa's biggest clients had publicly withdrawn their contracts, citing the news. By 1, the state had issued an emergency order shutting down the Route 9 warehouse, yellow tape stretched across the entrance within the hour. Domino after domino, falling exactly where I'd stacked them 5 years in advance. I drove past Callaway House that afternoon, unable to stay away. A small crowd had gathered outside, phones raised, whispering the way crowds do when something scandalous unfolds in real time. Diane stood on the front steps in last season's coat, mascara running in gray tracks down her face, shouting something at a reporter I couldn't hear from the street. Her gardenia perfume didn't reach me from that distance. I noticed its absence more than I would have noticed its presence. Power has a smell. Losing it apparently doesn't. Vanessa emerged from the building 20 minutes later, designer heels catching on the front step, mascara smudged, hair coming loose from its careful chignon. She looked older than 22 for the first time in either lifetime. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her phone, dropping it twice on the concrete. I watched from across the street, unnoticed, cold and very still. That evening, Dorian Kess called Diane directly. I only learned the details later. From Eleanor, who'd tapped a source inside the DA's office. He gave her 48 hours to produce the $4 million, or the debt would transfer to whoever legally controlled the majority shares. That was Vanessa. Vanessa, who'd signed the transfer papers without reading past the first page, thrilled to finally be someone important. The trap I hadn't built had just fully closed around her, exactly on schedule. The next morning, Julian's name appeared in Nadia's follow-up article, connected to an ongoing federal fraud investigation into a separate business deal. Unrelated to Calloway House but timed with a precision that felt almost too clean. I hadn't leaked that part. I didn't need to ask who had. Some debts get called in whether you're ready or not. Vanessa called me that afternoon, voice raw, stripped of every ounce of cruelty I'd grown used to. "You did this," she said. "Didn't you?" "I gave you a company," I said. "You decided what to do with it. You knew." Her breath hitched, somewhere between fury and panic. "You knew everything, and you let me sign those papers anyway." "Yes," I said. The silence on the line stretched long enough that I could hear her ragged breathing, tears she was too proud to let me hear directly. "Why?" she finally asked, small and broken in a way I'd never heard from her before, not once, in either version of my life. I thought about every answer I could give her. I settled on the truest one. "Because you never once asked what you were actually taking," I said. "You just wanted to win." She hung up without another word. I set my phone down on the kitchen table, hands steady, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel yet. Not triumph exactly. Something quieter. And colder. Settling into place where anger used to live. 3 days later, Diane showed up at my apartment unannounced, mascara gone, gardenia perfume replaced by something sharper, sweat, and fear, and the particular smell of a woman who hadn't slept in days. "Please," she said, standing in my doorway like a stranger. "You have to help us. Dorian Kess is going to—" "I'm not helping you," I said. "I'm your family." "You were never my family," I said. "You were a woman my father married, and a debt I inherited by accident. I fixed the second part. I'm not obligated to fix the first." Something in her face collapsed entirely, all the polish stripped away at once, leaving only an old, frightened woman standing in a hallway that didn't belong to her anymore. "You knew from the beginning," she whispered. "The will reading. You already knew everything. Didn't you?" "Yes," I said again, and this time I let her see exactly how long I'd known, how far back it went, how patiently I'd waited for this exact moment to arrive. Diane didn't say anything else. She turned and walked back down the stairs, footsteps uneven on the old wood, and I never saw her walk with confidence again. That night, I finally understood the full shape of what Eleanor Pratt had built alongside me, quietly, from the very first phone call. I'd assumed she'd simply been an unusually good lawyer, hired at exactly the right moment out of pure luck. I was wrong. She called me to her office one last time before everything settled, sliding a single photograph across her desk. My father, decades younger, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, smiling at the camera like she owned the whole world in front of her. "Who is this?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew the answer before my mind caught up to it. "Your mother," Eleanor said quietly. "The one you were told died when you were born." The room went very still around me, lamplight suddenly too warm, paper suddenly too thin between my fingers. "She didn't die," I said slowly. "No," Eleanor said. "She ran. 24 years ago. When she found out exactly what your father owed, and exactly who he owed it to. She's been watching from a distance ever since, waiting for you to be old enough, and ready enough, to fight back on your own." I sat across from the woman who just guided every single legal move I'd made for the past 5 months, and finally understood why she'd known about the renewal deadline before I'd ever told her. "You're not Eleanor Pratt," I said. She smiled, small and tired, 24 years of distance folding down into one quiet office. "Not entirely, no," she said. "But I've been Eleanor long enough that it almost feels true." I didn't cry. I'd used up all my tears in a life that hadn't happened yet. On a balcony that no longer existed anywhere but inside my own memory. Instead, I reached across the desk and took my mother's hand, calluses meeting calluses, 24 years of waiting, finally closing into something that felt, almost, like peace. Outside her office window, the city kept moving, indifferent to everything that had just quietly rearranged itself inside that small, cold room. Somewhere across town, Vanessa was watching her entire life collapse in real time. Somewhere else, Diane was learning exactly what it felt like to owe a debt she couldn't outrun. I still had one more thing left to do. One last conversation, before I could finally let any of it go. The days after the collapse moved fast, faster than I could fully track. News outlets picked up Nadia's story and multiplied it, headline after headline, each one sharper than the last. Callaway House. Fraud. Forged signatures. Toxic land. A $4 million debt to a man with a violent record spanning 2 decades. The crowd outside the building grew each day instead of shrinking. Reporters camped near the front steps, cameras ready, waiting for Vanessa or Diane to make a mistake in public. They didn't have to wait long. On the 4th day, a video surfaced online. Diane, cornered by a reporter outside a courthouse, screaming that none of it was her fault, that her husband had lied to her for years. Her mascara ran black down her cheeks. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The video reached 2 million views by midnight. I watched it once, standing in my kitchen with a mug of cold tea, and felt nothing sharper than mild, distant recognition. This was the woman who'd worn dry-eyed grief like a costume at my father's funeral. Now her grief was finally real, and nobody believed a word of it. Vanessa's remaining business partners dropped one by one that week, dominoes falling exactly where I'd stacked them months earlier. A furniture supplier in Vermont canceled their contract on Monday. An auction house in New York severed ties on Tuesday. By Wednesday, Callaway House's storefront windows were papered over from the inside, a handwritten sign taped to the glass door. Closed until further notice. I drove past it once more, slower this time. The brass nameplate above the door, Callaway House, Est. 1911, hung slightly crooked. One screw missing. Nobody had bothered to fix it. Nobody would. Dorian Kess's deadline came and went without payment. I learned what happened next only in fragments, secondhand, filtered through Eleanor's careful phrasing and Walter's nervous phone calls. Federal agents raided a storage unit connected to Kess 2 days after the deadline passed, seizing records that implicated half a dozen people, Vanessa's name among them, buried in a paper trail she hadn't known existed until it was already too late to hide from. She wasn't arrested. Not yet. But her passport photo appeared on a watch list, and her bank accounts froze solid overnight, every card declined, every transfer blocked. I imagined her standing at a register somewhere, humiliated, a stranger's patience running thin behind her in line. I didn't have to imagine hard. Walter told me it happened exactly that way, at a pharmacy 2 blocks from her old apartment. I saw her once more before everything finally settled, by accident, outside a small legal aid office downtown. She'd lost weight in a matter of weeks, cheekbones sharp under skin gone pale, dark circles bruising the delicate skin beneath her eyes. No diamond rings caught the afternoon light anymore. Her hands were bare, nails bitten down to nothing. She saw me before I could turn away. "You planned all of this," she said. Not an accusation this time. Just a fact, finally settling into place. From the very beginning. "Yes," I said. "The engagement. The shares. All of it." Her voice cracked on the last word. "You gave me a bomb and called it a gift. I gave you exactly what you were greedy enough to take," I said. "I never once forced your hand." She flinched like I'd struck her, and for one strange moment, standing on that cold sidewalk, I almost felt something close to pity. Almost. It didn't last long enough to matter. "What happens to me now?" she asked quietly, and for the first time in either lifetime, she sounded genuinely lost. "That's not my problem anymore," I said. It never really was. I walked away before she could answer, her rose perfume thinner now, cheaper, a drugstore substitute for the expensive bottle she could no longer afford fading behind me with every step. That scent used to mean betrayal. Now it just smelled like nothing at all. Power, once it's gone, doesn't leave much of a trace behind it. Eleanor called me in for one deposition before the case moved fully out of our hands, a small conference room downstairs from the courthouse, all fluorescent light and cracked leather chairs. The room smelled of old coffee and worn upholstery. A court reporter's keys clicking steady in the corner. Diane sat across the table, a lawyer on either side of her, her hands twisting a tissue to shreds beneath the table's edge. Someone's pen tapped against a legal pad, slow and relentless, marking time nobody in that room could stop. "State your relationship to the deceased," the opposing attorney said. "Richard Callaway was my husband," Diane said, voice flat, rehearsed. I had no knowledge of any loan arrangement. I watched her say it. Gardenia perfume long gone. Replaced now by something sour underneath sweat, and stale coffee, and fear that no amount of rehearsal could quite mask. Her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light when her hand shook, diamond dull under the harsh glare. Miss Calloway. The attorney turned to me. When did you first become aware of the loan documents? The week of my father's funeral, I said. I found copies in his accountant's files. And you did nothing with that information for several months. I did everything with that information, I said. I just didn't tell anyone until I was ready. A small, tight silence settled over the room. Diane's eyes flicked toward me, something between hatred and disbelief moving across her face, quick as a struck match. You planned this, she said, low enough that the court reporter almost missed it. From the very start. Objection, her own lawyer said quickly. Not a question. The room moved on without answering her. It didn't need to. We both already knew the truth of it, sitting between us like something solid enough to touch. That night, alone in my apartment above the bakery, I finally let myself think through the whole shape of what I'd built, start to finish. The way you'd walk back through a house after the movers finished emptying every room. I had never wanted the shares. I'd wanted Vanessa holding them the exact moment the debt came due. I had never wanted Julian for myself, not this time around. I'd wanted him standing close enough to Vanessa that his federal investigation caught her too, collateral damage neither of them saw coming until it already had them both by the throat. Every quiet phone call, every closed account, every document I'd handed to Eleanor, all of it had been aimed at this single collapse. It was engineered a full 5 years before anyone else even knew there was a game being played. The information gap I'd carried since the day I woke up in my childhood bed finally closed, all at once, inside my own head. I hadn't been reacting to anything Vanessa or Diane did. I'd been waiting for them to walk exactly where I already knew the ground gave out. There was still one loose thread left. One conversation I hadn't allowed myself yet, because some part of me had been afraid of exactly how it would end. I picked up my phone and called Julian Voss for the last time. Julian agreed to meet me at a diner on the edge of town. Neutral ground. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease hanging thick in the air. He looked smaller than I remembered him being, shoulders hunched, sandalwood cologne faded to almost nothing under the sweat of a man running out of places to hide. They're pulling my passport next week, he said, before I'd even sat down. You did this. I told the truth, I said. You did the rest yourself. I loved you once. His voice cracked, somewhere between anger and desperation. Doesn't that count for anything? I studied his hands wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't touched, steady now only because fear had replaced whatever confidence used to live there. You put your hands on me, I said quietly. More than once. You just never did it where anyone else could see. His face went pale under the fluorescent light. That's not I never. Don't. I said. Not to me. Not anymore. He didn't answer that. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't have been another lie. And we both knew it. Why? He finally asked. Why go through all of this? The shares. The debt. Me. I thought about lying to him too, the way I'd been lying to everyone else about my reasons. Instead, I gave him the truth, cold and final, the way frost settles over glass. Because in another life, you were the last thing I ever saw, I said. I wanted to make sure it never happened to anyone else. Something shifted behind his eyes, confusion, then something closer to fear, the particular fear of a man realizing he's talking to someone who already knows exactly how his story ends. What are you talking about? He said. You don't need to understand it, I said. You just need to know it's over. I stood up before he could answer, coffee cup rattling faintly against the table, and left him sitting alone under those buzzing lights. That was the last time I ever saw Julian Voss. I heard, months later, that he pled guilty to reduced charges and left the state entirely. I never asked where he went. I stopped needing to know. There was one more twist waiting for me, one I hadn't planned myself, tucked inside paperwork my mother had quietly filed decades before I was even born. Eleanor called me to her office one final time, sliding across a single clause buried on page 40 of the original shareholder agreement, written in careful legal language nobody had bothered to read in over 100 years. Any shareholder who assumes controlling interest, she read aloud, assumes full personal liability for undisclosed debts and environmental violations discovered within 5 years of transfer. I stared at the clause, understanding arriving slow and cold. "You wrote this," I said. "Before I was even born." "Your mother wrote it," Eleanor said quietly. "The year she married your father." A woman who already suspected exactly what kind of family she was marrying into. She closed the folder gently. "She built the trap decades before you ever set foot in it. All you had to do was hand it to the right person." I sat with that for a long moment, the shape of it settling into place. Every trap I thought I'd built alone had actually been 2 traps, stacked one on top of the other, separated by 24 years and one mother's quiet, patient foresight. Vanessa hadn't just inherited a debt-ridden company. She'd inherited a legal guarantee of her own ruin, written in ink before either of us had ever met. I hadn't known that clause existed. Nobody had. Except the one woman who'd been waiting in the shadows the entire time, giving me exactly enough rope to hang the people who'd once, in another life, hung me first. That was the twist even I hadn't seen coming. Autumn arrived early that year, gold light slanting low through Rosa's workshop windows, sawdust drifting gentle in the afternoon air. I stayed at the shop a while longer, hands steady now, calluses thick and permanent, proof of a life built from nothing but honest labor and patient revenge. My mother and I met for coffee most Sundays after that, slow and careful, 2 women learning how to be family in a way that had nothing to do with inheritance or debt. She never apologized for the years she'd been gone. I never asked her to. Some things don't need forgiveness. They just need time. And neither of us had any left to waste. I didn't gloat over Vanessa's collapse, or Diane's, or Julian's. There was no satisfaction left in it by the time the dust finally settled, only a quiet, steady peace. I hadn't expected to feel this early in a life I'd once thought would end at 31, on cold concrete, with someone else's laughter following me down. On the first real warm day of the following spring, I drove out past the old Route 9 warehouse, fenced off now, cleanup crews working slow behind yellow caution tape. I didn't stop the car. I just watched it pass in my rearview mirror, smaller and smaller, until it disappeared behind the tree line entirely. I found a small plot of land an hour outside the city instead, cheap and overgrown, sunlight falling warm and unguarded across a field nobody else wanted. I knelt there some afternoons with dirt under my fingernails, the smell of turned earth rich and honest in a way gardenia perfume never once managed to be. Somewhere overhead, birds moved between the trees, calling to each other in a language that owed nothing to anyone. That warmth on my skin was the only thing I still let myself measure a life by. Not debt. Not inheritance. Not revenge. Finally spent and quiet in my chest like a fire burned down to embers. I still catch sandalwood on a stranger sometimes, on a crowded train, in a coffee shop doorway. My chest still tightens for half a second, old muscle memory refusing to fully let go. Then I breathe out, slow and deliberate, and the moment passes like weather. Gardenia does the same thing, quieter now, more like an echo than a wound. I don't flinch from it the way I used to. I just notice it. The way you'd notice an old scar catching the light, proof of something survived rather than something still bleeding. The sun on that overgrown field never once triggered anything but calm. I made sure of that. Deliberately. The same patient way I'd made sure of everything else. Some anchors you inherit. Others, you have to build yourself. One warm afternoon at a time. I didn't forgive them. I never once claimed to. I simply stopped needing them to lose more than they already had, and walked away with dirt on my hands and sun on my face, into a life nobody could take from me twice. If you were me, would you have saved her, or walked away? Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from?